like cozy group, and I'll be happy to ask your questions and, pinpoint areas. Hopefully, we can all go away with something we can use in our workplaces. So, one question before I start. And the question is, please, how many people here are hybrid or fully remote? Like hybrid? Hybrid? Fully remote. Wow. Okay. Oh, this gets very interesting. Okay, so good. Now, the reason why I asked that question is so that I can direct a lot of what we do to fully remote. I'm not going to speak hybrid, so no hybrid talk here, fully remote. And just some insights. My company is also fully remote, but maybe some of you might be veterans. I'm not a veteran in fully remote. I actually started fully remote last year. We did hybrid from COVID. We were one of the people who COVID forced into, the hybrid work, but now we're fully remote. So good. So I'm here to present my research. This is part of a doctorate research. So yes, it has gone through some rigor, and that's why it's called research backed, but that's it. So I'm going to talk about a subject which, if anyone in HR here, good, good. Anyone not in HR? Okay, good. So I'm going to help us with just a definition, not some. And the reason why is just so that when I use the term engagement, you understand. Because sometimes when you say engagement, people start thinking about it in lay terms. So I want you to understand what I mean by engagement, okay? So for the purpose of this short workshop, engagement here means a positive, work-oriented mindset. Did you get that? A positive, work-oriented mindset characterized by dedication, vigor, and absorption. Does that make sense? Okay, so when I say engaged, I mean a positive work-oriented mindset characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption. In HR, we spent so much trying to get employees engaged. But guess what? Why did I go into this research? Why did I even embark on this research? It took me 3 years. Why? Because there wasn't much work on remote work environments. There was a lot of work on engagement and why it matters, okay? Companies, the research was done. Everyone knew that if engaged workforces, they deliver more profits, they deliver more revenue. It was very clear. But no one was looking at remote workers. And why is it important to look at remote work? Because remote work is a different environment. How is it a different environment? Because it has different characteristics to traditional office. So remote work is often characterized by 1, lone working. Hello, working alone. 2, reliance on technology. Another one, obvious. And thirdly, who can guess the third one? How does remote work differ from traditional work? Yeah, flexibility, autonomy. Yeah? Another one, I said 3 main characteristics, but I'll add a bonus. Most remote work is done at home. Okay? So think about it. If someone works at home, it's very different from working in the office. If someone also works alone, it's very different from working in the office. Yeah? And if you need technology to work, it's very different from working in the office. So we cannot use the same data. And we can't use the same strategies that they use in the office. And that's something that people have been keep doing. They use the same in-person strategies for remote work. Okay? So I was curious, and I said, you know what? I'm going to find out, I'm going to do some research on remote workers because it's a different context, okay? So that is just so that you understand the motivation. The remote work environment is a different one, and so we can't use the same strategies. We may find out that we're using the same strategies, but we need to be more intentional when we're looking at remote workers, okay? So now I've touched on engagement, what it means. Why does it matter? Obviously, because if you can get people engaged, they're more deliberate about their work, they have a positive mindset, and of course, your company will make more profit, your company will make more revenue, and all those great things. But what is the data telling us about engagement? It's funny. engagement is actually declining. And more people are working remotely, but the engagement figures are going down. So this is a very important topic for anyone who works remotely. So I'm hoping that you will understand that this is a global challenge because obviously remote work has become a global phenomenon, right? So this is based on my own research on remote workers. And a big part of this research is it's from an emerging market, okay? But the great thing about data is that even when it comes from one market, it can be applied to another. Some of the nuances of my research may not be applicable to some of you. How many people here are from the US? Everyone? I hope not. Anyone here not from the US? Good. So you might learn something from Africa, where things don't always work as well. Right, so here it goes. So one thing I learned from, when I was doing my research was the issue of loneliness. People fail to admit it. A lot of us love, especially if you're an independent spirit like I am. I've loved working remotely, even before. When the pandemic hit, I know, for some of you old school, who have been remote workers for ages, for some of us, I was like, God, thank God, finally, I can work, I can work from home. I love working from home. I love working alone. Even though I love people, but I love working alone. But it does get lonely. People fail to admit it, but it is very lonely. A lot of the people I surveyed, I researched on, loneliness is a big issue, even when people fail to admit it. People feel disconnected at work. It doesn't matter. The only thing connecting people who work remotely is technology. But when it comes to, and this reminds me, just last week, I had a meeting with my distributor team. And a lot of people make this mistake. They just want to, it's all about work. You get on that Teams meeting and you start talking about work. And one of my colleagues was doing just that. And I said, you know what? Before we get into work, can we just ask people, how are they doing? What's going on with you? How has your week been? How has your year been? Because I hadn't spoken to them in a month. Not spoken, as in we hadn't had a proper meeting in a month. So the disconnectedness, it was strange. We spent about half an hour talking about everything else but not work. But it changed the tone of the meeting. Because I was actually dreading that meeting. Because I was like, oh God, it's going to be a drab meeting, blah, blah, blah. But just talking about everyone's personal circumstances changed the whole tone of the conversation. So the disconnectedness is a very big thing when it comes to remote working. Okay. So I'm going to, first of all, reveal the insights. Now, it's not like there's anything that you'll see here in terms of the factors that I identified. There's nothing, it's not rocket science. It's things that we've been hearing about. But what I want you to take out from it is that if you've not been intentional about it, know that it matters even more in remote work. Maybe this might be a recap for you. Maybe this might help you to be more intentional about the things you're even doing right. Because a lot of us here, if you're a veteran in remote work, you're already doing things right because you've been doing it for so long. But sometimes you need to know that that thing you're doing right, you should keep doing it because we take it for granted, right? A lot of us, you'd be doing something, how important are these things anyway? They're important. And I'm going to start with the insights. There's 7 factors, 7 of them. Like I said, there are none of them that you haven't encountered, but I want you to know that if you're doing it already, this is very important. And if you're not doing it, maybe you need to revisit these factors. And I'll start with them one by one. Like I said, everyone who works remotely knows that it's a benefit. A lot of people would not go back to the office because they like the benefit that remote work offers them. We know it. When people are called back to the office, and I'm sure most people here are not in that category, but I just want you to know how much people cherish the lifestyle benefits. They cherish it so much. It's so important, okay? So never even attempt or think of taking it away or making people meet more often or more frequently, it's a benefit that people cherish. And people will kick back if you try to. So lifestyle benefits, the work-life balance, the perks, the ability to manage themselves is very cherished. Okay? So anything you can do to improve that, please do it. If you're doing well in that area, keep doing it, because your employees or your contractors, they really appreciate it. Lifestyle benefits are very key. Tools, I see quite a number of tools being represented here. I see a number of companies, vendors here selling collaborative tools. Yes, I know most of us here probably use Slack or Teams or whatever, but there's some new, I can see some really good tools that are more integrative, they have more features and things like that. The tools matter, okay? So if you can get a tool that is more collaborative, the tools help engagement in remote work. How do they help engagement? Of course, remote work relies on technology to be connected, but if you have collaborative tools, the videos on, nothing that we're not doing, but be more deliberate about it. Some people have meetings without videos on. The videos on matter, okay? So you might think, you see, when you don't have your videos, you might as well be on a phone call. It's not the same, okay? So even if you have a policy on you must have your video on, it's not bad, it's a good thing. So know that the videos matter. Anything that can make you feel more connected, which can be as simple as just putting on your video, can make a huge difference when it comes to remote work connectedness or remote work engagement in this case. Leadership and management, big issue, always has been. Some of the biggest issues we have with remote work comes from line managers. People enjoy remote work, but a lot of managers don't know how to manage remote workers, okay? There's still a challenge there. So a lot of remote workers experience better engagement when they have managers who care about them. Now, this is true for even when we were in the office, but guess what? It's even more important when you're not in the office. I mean, people struggle with managers when we're in the office, but guess what? We have to be more intentional about our management when we're working remotely. So managers, very key. HR systems, policies, very key. Some people think, oh, we work remotely, we don't need HR, or we don't need people management, or we don't need No. You see, culture is difficult to manage in the office. It is much more difficult to manage when you can't even see people. So if you have to be on if the tone is 5 when you're in the office, then it has to be on 10. And what do I mean? You need to be more intentional about culture programs. You need to be more intentional about policies. And when I mean policies, not policies that make people feel tight, but policies that make people feel more human or more connected. So leadership, supportive leadership, adaptive HR practices are very key. So that's the third factor. One thing, the fourth factor is work design, but I'll tell you what was the most important thing that came out from the research. Work design is about the structure of the work, how meaningful the work is, how impactful the work been. You see, when you're not seeing people, like I said, the disconnectedness is real. So a lot of remote workers, if the work has meaning, impact, challenge, it makes such a huge difference to them. But something that came up that surprised me was the element of fun. Jeez. That came up a lot in my research. I knew people like to have fun, but I didn't know they like to have fun so much, right? So when you're thinking, sometimes for people in HR or even managers, you're just thinking, look, this is all about work. But the fun element, I don't know, you might need to be a comedian or you might do whatever you need to do to incorporate fun into work, okay? This was something that I couldn't believe the number of people who kept mentioning fun. They mentioned impact, meaning, but fun just kept coming up. And it wasn't because of them being a certain generation, no. Work needs to be interesting. Work needs to be purposeful. And remember, we're talking about engagement. That's why this is an issue. If the topic was not engagement, then fun may not be an issue. But if you want people to be at work and bring their whole selves to work, work has to be meaningful and fun. So when you're thinking about designing work, please, if you're that serious kind of person who's like, oh, it's all about work, no nonsense, please try and light it up and make work fun. So that's one. And then, of course, the fifth one was relationships and communication. Nothing we haven't heard about. However, we need to be on point with relationships. It is not easy to have great relationships over the phone or over the internet. But yes, I know that there are initiatives like the water cooler channels on your Slack and things like that. But you need to be more intentional about relationships, especially when you don't see people. So relationships and how do you do that? I don't think there's any remote firm that doesn't have their quarterlies or monthlies, meetups or something like that. Keep doing it. Don't think it's a waste of money, okay? So what my research is telling us is that you're doing the right thing. Because some of you might be looking at it and be like, oh gosh, this costs too much. Keep doing it, because sometimes that's the only link people have to the organization. That's the only thing that makes them feel like they're still part of a community. So keep up with the relationships. Anything that will improve relationships and help you with relationships, keep doing it. Team bonding, social interactions, keep them going. And not just virtual, do the physical ones when you can. Whether it's once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, keep them going because it makes people still feel connected. The fourth one it reminded me, there was something a CEO said to me. Some people are great, but they're not great on their own. The issue of self-discipline, it came up a lot in my research. Self-discipline is a very important factor for engagement in remote work, okay? A lot of times when we have issues with particular employees, some employees or some people, they struggle with discipline. But it has come up in the research that discipline is a requirement. So, hey, when you're hiring a recruiter, I don't know how you're going to look for discipline in terms of characteristics or competencies, but it's very key. And if someone can't be disciplined on their own, then you need to look for ways to help them with discipline, because discipline is a big factor. Because you can't be engaged if you cannot be disciplined, because engagement requires you to focus. And some people get distracted easily. So if you've not thought about it, please think. Some people are great, but they're not great on their own. So that's where policies help, practices help, mentoring, and those are important. So some employees need help. Some need help with motivation, but quite a number might need help with discipline. So anything. And career growth, okay? There's something that comes up, especially with younger people. I think older people don't really mind, but younger people, they come into an organization and they can't see any possibility. They can't see any career path. And working remotely is even more difficult. So think about mentoring programs, think about career development programs or initiatives, especially when you bring younger people into your organization. And last but not least was the environment. I think the last speaker, the Tulsa remote guy, spoke on some of the issues around environment. In this context, environment means several things. The work setup, okay? There's something we take for granted, and this emerged especially from African data. We assume, or we take it for granted, that everyone has a nice, dedicated office space in their house. That's not the case, okay? The work environment is a very big factor in engagement. I mean, I have a dedicated office space, but my 6-year-old will always interrupt that. It's funny because he comes home at 3 p.m. and as soon as he barges into my office, I leave my office door open for security. I mean, anything could happen. As soon as he barges, even if I'm in a meeting and I go, nah, he comes closer even. So understand that because 80% of people work from home, that is their office environment, and it's not ideal. Okay? When we worked in the office, an office environment is a standard environment, but when people work from home, there is no standard. Because my office is different from your office, which is different from your office. And it's not just about the equipment. They might have good internet, and they may not. In Africa, internet is poor in Nigeria, okay? So they may not, the tools might not be as effective. But yes, you may not have a problem with tools, but everybody does not have a dedicated space. In fact, the research, even in America, shows that quite a number of people work in different spaces. Some people work in the kitchen, some people work in the living room. That is not a standard space. Space is very key when it comes to being engaged because your space can be interrupted. One of the biggest issues with space is work, home, interruptions. In my case, my 6-year-old, right? Because he will always barge in. In somebody else's space, it's noise from the highway. In somebody else's space, it's heat. In Africa, where I come from, it's heat. People are hot. People are really hot. And when the place is hot, it's not conducive for working. So that's the last factor. So the environment is workspace. And the environment is it could be the state, just like Tulsa remotes. The environment also extends to the city. How convenient is that city? Is New York is not a similar environment to Austin, Texas. It's not a similar environment, to, California. It's different. So we must bear all those things in mind. So what next? Now that you know the factors, okay? I've taken time to explain to you these factors. Like I said, just think about them different. They're not things that you do not know about. But if you look at them more closely, there might be initiatives in each of these areas that you can implement that will improve engagement. Why is engagement important? Your employees or your contractors, they're already working for you. But when they're not engaged, if you think you're getting good results, you could even get better. If you're getting 80%, you could get 100%. So why get the current output you're getting? Just know that you could get 20% better if these factors were present. So what have I done with this? I've used this to create a framework. And that framework, very easy, which I'll just go to the next slide. Just 4 factors. I basically split the insights from the research into 4 factors. Poets. I did have an ambition to be a poet at some point. So P-O-E-T, if you want to remember my framework. And it categorizes the factors into personal factors, organizational, environmental, and of course, technological. And what I've done is that, and anyone can do this, okay? It's a framework, but I've created questions in each of those areas, which you can use to audit your current state of remote work engagement. So don't get me wrong, you can carry out your typical engagement surveys, but guess what? Your engagement surveys is not going to ask you questions around remote working. And remember what I said in the very beginning, that remote work is a different context. So if you're going to use a traditional employee engagement survey, you're going to be measuring engagement in terms of, okay, the way they feel about, how engaged they are at work. But if you're working in a remote context, you want to know what drives engagement in remote work context. And you want your questions to be specific to the remote work environment. And that's what this framework does for you. So how do you use it? Use it to create an engagement audit for a remote work environment. Ask questions in those 4 key areas. Okay, and I'll show you some of the questions, yeah? And then use the results to tailor your initiatives, because you're going to find out what areas need help and what areas you can improve on. And then, of course, monitor and improve. So I'm going to show you just some of the very, very simple, and it's a framework I've shared it with the Running Remote team, and they can share the questions with you. But how does this work? So it's almost like a health tool, like, a checkup. How does your organization measure up? So in each of these areas, you have a score out of 5. And you can look up, in the personal area, do I have clear career growth opportunities? Am I prioritizing well-being? So if you distribute this survey or, this audit, you can do the audit yourself. Well, you could do it organizational wide, and you could also assess how different teams measure up, or you can assess, how the whole organization measures up. So you can use it to assess the current state. On the organizational level, you have things like regular check-ins, recognition systems. So I have questions, about 4 or 5 questions for each of the strategic areas that you can ask. How is your leadership? Issues on culture. You can also edit it. So what I'm giving you is a framework that you can add to or remove. But at least you know that I must assess personal factors, organizational factors, environmental factors, and technological factors. So I've helped you with questions, especially on the environmental side. People don't like to ask questions about people's home office, whether they have adequate home office. Why? Because they don't want to be responsible for it, right? Because you know what? If you find out that that employee is working on the floor, what next? What are you going to do about it, right? So that's probably a question. But you need to know, because the environment that the employee works in is the office. It's their office. So you need to know how these are set up. And do they have boundaries? I mean, what can you do with this data? You can help the employee on a personal level, or you can look at the data on an organizational level, and you can just come up with initiatives or policies for your organization as a whole. So the good thing is that if you do the audit with one person, you can help the individual. If you do it with a team, you can help the team. Or you can look at the data organizational-wide, and you can come up with strategies and programs to help the organization as a whole. So they're sample questions, like I said, and just like any audit, the good thing, it gives you a clear measure. You can assess it over a period. You can check it from last year to this year. You can check it by individual team or the organization as a whole. So these are just practical strategies, like I said. I'll take your questions, but basically, the usual. It's not going to be anything different, but I still say train your leaders. Remote work leadership skills are very different from traditional work skills. So we need to keep training and retraining leaders, because we learn every day. So training on remote work leadership is key. We might be training people on general leadership, but remote work leadership is a competence on its own. Of course, we continue to leverage on technology. There's a lot I'm hearing about AI here. We continue to use those technologies. But remember, make work meaningful, make work fun. That's something that came up really, really big time. So just to wrap up, and I'll take any questions that we may have, is conduct your audit. I've given you a framework you can use to conduct your audit. Implement any initiatives, because you will see the areas where you're lacking. Then you can key in and implement initiatives in those areas. And then, of course, just like anything, monitor progress. So, I think that's it from me on my research-backed framework. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. And we can connect on LinkedIn. And you can search for my name. My name's Adora Ikwuemesi. Very easy to find. So, any questions, please?
Yeah, we have time for one question.
So when you showed the framework and the triangle, is it like you have to have your base correct, or it just happens to be in that order?
Yes, no. It's just the framework. That was the one that fits. It doesn't have to be like that. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Another question? I'm sure we can have.
That was short. So we have one more. Going once.
They'll share the slides, and then I'll share sample questions. Thank you.
One of the challenges that I've seen over the years, and we actually talk about this on our jobs page, but when we hire young people that are in college, so they've never had any kind of job, let alone remote, and they're coming into a remote job as their first job, I always say be careful, because there's a trade-off there. You lose the opportunity to network, to get organic mentorship, and develop your communication skills, etc. So if you were talking to a young person who was right out of college, you don't know what company they're interviewing at. Yes. What do you tell them? How do they become successful in that remote role? How do they become engaged within the first 3 months, let's say?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite, I would say it would be an unfortunate position to be because we've put the burden on them. But really, at that stage of their career, the burden should actually be on the organization. So what I would tell them is, they need to be very intentional because no one is going to save you. So you need to do this for yourself, Ask questions. I would tell them to network upwards because that would be the only way they could survive in such an environment. But ideally, of course, the environment should provide them with the structure, to build their career. But if not, I would tell them to take their career into their hands and do what they need to do, like by networking upwards. Thank you.